So today we have Ryan D. Lee on our show.
Yeah. He partnered with an old school guy, Robert Allen. A lot of people like in my age, were reading Robert Allen books. So, for years and years and years. But he's in the Kiyosaki era, and so he partnered with this guy and retire in 10 years or less. So it's a very interesting. He's kind of a young guy and quit a corporate job and was able to do that by just buying 17 houses.
But he also explained, why he chose to take his money out of Wall Street and put it onto Main Street. And so I thought that was really interesting. And he gives some good first steps in order to learn about this and do it.
Yeah. And it was great. You were able to talk about some of your stories too, because you kind of went through a similar path.
Yeah, we did. We went through, we both kind of accidentally fell into real estate. It was neither of our decisions, really.
Yeah, but then now you're crushing it. So anyway, it's a great interview. I'm glad we had him on.
Ryan, thanks for being on the show today.
Yeah. Hey, Ryan. Good to see you again.
What's up, Ken?
I'd love to know, like, you just launched this great book, How to Retire in 10 Years or Less. Let's talk about that, the success, why you wrote it. Because I think it's right in line with the way Danille and I think, buy assets that somebody else pays off and use the tax benefits. Essentially, I don't want to minimize what you have in the book, but let's talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, that's honestly exactly what's in the book. I mean, it's the simplest thing ever. It's the most boring path to achieving financial freedom. Danille, I think it's kind of how you got into the game of real estate, but for me, I had a very traditional mindset around money. And, when I graduated college, I'll never forget that day. Ken, I know you kind of talk back and forth sometimes about being the old guy when you're on the podcast. I got a paycheck in an envelope back on my first paycheck out of college. And I remember I put that thing in my back pocket. It was kind of like this symbol of success for me that I had arrived at a college degree, at a professional job. I actually had to move down to Tucson to take the job. And I remember when I opened the check at the end of the day, I had to flip that check over a couple of times because I thought there had to be a mistake, right? There was way less money in there than I thought should be in there. And I remember this little voice just kind of going off in the back of my head that I should just quit now. I didn't want to live in Tucson. I didn't want to work for my boss named Rob. I didn't want to be in the career I was in. It was just kind of the way that everything fell into place for me. And I thought to myself, you know what? I'm just going to climb the corporate ladder. I'm going to work as hard as I can, save as much as I can. And my arbitrary, vague goal at the time was retire early. That was what I wanted to do. I just wanted to retire early. And all the social conditioning for me kicked in that moment, right? I decided to max fund my 401k. Once I did that, I got my company sponsored match. Once I did that, I opened up a separate brokerage account. I was doing all the things that I was told to do. And I'll be honest with you, Ken, in the beginning, I thought it was working, right? I thought it was working. And in, 2005, 2006, 2007, I was making money. And I remember when my net worth crested about 100K. I thought, man, I'm rich. I didn't know what that meant, but I had $100,000 in net worth in all of those various accounts. And then you guys know how the game went, right? In 2008, everything dropped like a rock. And for me at first, I thought I had done something wrong, right? I mean, as I watched my accounts go down and down and down, and I didn't know why, and there were no answers, I thought it was me. I just picked the wrong fund, right? But I had the opportunity. I was only 4 years out of college when 2008 happened, and I was looking into a window in my future because all my coworkers, right, all the people I was kind of modeling my life after, my career after, I remember their views, their ideas, their hope for retirement. I watched it all fade away in front of their eyes. And for the first time, I learned a couple of really powerful lessons. Number one, I had no control, zero control. And if I had no control, how could I ever plan on retiring early? I'm a control guy, right? I want to control my money so I can control my outcomes within a range of expectations. But number two, I realized I was playing the same game all of those guys were playing, but I was expecting a different result. That is the definition of insanity. And that was my wake-up call that maybe there was something different. And, just as you did, I picked up, a book that previous to this moment in time sounded crazy to me. I picked up that little purple book, Rich Dad, Poor Dad. And, the first time I picked it up, this was back when I was first out of college. And he said, savers are losers. And that, honestly, I'm like, this is crazy. I'm going to save. I'm going to work hard, save hard. I'm going to retire early. But now I was open. And, in 2008, when I picked up his book, I understood what he meant when he said savers are losers, because I was quite literally losing the game of finance, and I had to figure out why.
That's a really, really great story. I think it's funny, but I don't want to gloss over this because I think what happens is we all kind of come out of college with this illusion, right? And we're not really taught about money. I know, Danille, you had an extremely similar situation. Maybe you should talk about that because you had a similar epiphany, different industry, but very similar.
Yeah. So, I bartended all through college and, I was making, I mean, back then, like $400, $500, $600 cash a week. Plus you got some indiscriminatory little paycheck too on top of that. Right. But I was only working like 20 hours, and it was a fun job, but I was excited because I was going to be a school teacher and I was going to make $30,000 a year. So to me, I'm like, that's plenty of money. I didn't really, other than just very minor budgeting, I didn't really understand money and I definitely didn't understand tax. So when I got my first paycheck, kind of the same thing happened where I'm like, wait a minute, this check is actually less than, it was when I was bartending. I mean, it really wasn't that different. And now I'm working 40 hours a week and I have way more bills than I had in college. And so I was broke and then I had to go get a second job and then I had to get a third job, and 3 jobs to just get by, for a not great paying career. So I was a little opposite of you where I didn't have any money to stock away because I was making $30,000. But at the same time, I was left disappointed because I thought I was just going to be a teacher, get summers off, knew I wasn't going to be rich, but I would be comfortable in my mind. And here I am sharing a not great apartment in a not great area with another girl and working 3 jobs just to make it happen.
I remember you telling me the story though. You went to a meeting with I think it was the principal and you were a bunch of the teachers and the principal said something like, like if you guys do the right thing, 10 years from now, you could be making over 40.
Yeah, he was making like 47 and he's like, you just got to get tenure and then you have to get your master's. And in my head, I'm like, I looked in the master's program. It was like, I think at the time, 50 grand. And I'm like, oh my God, I don't know if that seems worth it. At least I had the financial sense to know that, like another 50 grand to make another, $15,000 a year. Oh. Arizona pays teachers and principals and everything. But right before tax. And so anyways, I just, when in my mind, I was like, I can't afford another student loan payment, on top of the one that I was already paying. So it was one of those things where it is that epiphany because you think you're done. Like you think, okay, I finished college, I have my career, and here we go. It's going to be nice and easy, from here on out. And then, we were shocked for different things, but it was still shocking.
Totally. I agree 100% on that. I mean, and side note number 1, man, it's no wonder we're so dependent as a society today. I mean, we pay our teachers nothing and then we expect them to turn around and train our kids, educate our kids. So that we could take that whole conversation in a whole different rabbit hole for sure.
Well, I'll tell you, to your point, and Danille, I asked her, I don't know, how many people did you have going through your education program at Kent State? You had like 20 or something?
Oh, yeah. In my cohort, there was, 25 of us.
So 25. So I asked her, I go, how many, by the way, I mean, I would, if Danille could teach, she would be incredible, right? But she left because of the pay. And so I said, how many of those people are still teachers? Remember what you said?
I mean, I think it's like 2 or 3
out of 25.
Yeah.
So that, that should tell you something. And so a lot of times I think people will probably hear this and they'll say, well, they need to pay teachers more. That is the most common response. And while I cannot disagree with that, I think it's the trap we're trying to talk about here. Totally. The trap that we all fall into when we, like when you open your paycheck, or Danille opened her paycheck and she's like, there's no possible way I could live on this. And then all of a sudden, it's a little depressing, right? Like you kind of mentioned that. You said, I don't want to be in Tucson. This is not what I thought I was going to be in the middle of, right?
100%. And that was my first wake up call in 2008. And I'm so grateful for it because it taught me the one thing that I never had up to this point. I had zero financial education. I had no idea why the market dropped, and I had no idea what to do to correct it. And the more I learned, as I started picking up books like Rich Dad, Poor Dad, it taught me that the number one thing that people need is money is just a tool. It'll take us wherever we want to be, wherever we want to go, but it will never replace you as the driver. And so I went on a voracious reading, seminars, podcasts. I just had to figure out this game of money because what I knew at the moment, I couldn't put my finger on it. But now that I know in hindsight, money is really code for time, right? I'm trading my time to get money. I'm trying to save up enough money to buy my time back. And if that goes on long enough, right? If I follow that path for 10, 15, 20, 30, 40 years and it didn't work, I've traded my life for a game that I had really no ability to win. And so that like set me on a path. And, you know, when I read Robert Kiyosaki's book, it gave me a new paradigm, a new perspective, but I didn't know what to do with it. And so a couple of months later, I picked up the book that was really my roadmap to start implementing the mindsets that Rich Dad Poor Dad gave me. It was Creating Wealth by Robert Allen. And he's probably, just like you, Ken, I call him the OG, right? He's one of the originals back in the real estate game. And his little book, Creating Wealth, it gave a playbook. It gave a playbook that was so simple that me, with my lack of financial education, I could see myself implementing. And he said it was the subtitle of his book that caught my attention. It said, you could retire in 10 years. Right here I am trying to figure out how to retire early. That wasn't working. Robert Kiyosaki gave me a new paradigm, and Robert Allen gave me a playbook to say, hey, if you bought 2 single-family homes per year, that's it, just 2, you could retire within 10 years. And that seemed doable enough to me that I started on the path. Now, I learned a ton of lessons that have come out in this updated book, but I realized that real estate was a wealth amplifier. It was something that I had far more control over, and it gave me access, you know, to really the most powerful financial tool of all. It's leverage, right? And without leverage, without real estate, without assets that provide leverage, you're in a 40-year game. With leverage, you can shrink your timelines and do something that takes most other people 40 years with their fingers crossed. You could do it in 10 years or less. And so that's how I got into real estate. And within 4 years, I bought 17 single family homes. I still own some of them right down in your neck of the woods. I own properties in Phoenix, Arizona. I bought after the dip out there. They've been phenomenal assets. But with 17 properties, 4 years later, I quit my 6-figure job. And, you know, we can talk more about how I did that and what that felt like and all of that. But that was the framework. For me, it was single family homes, simple, boring, buy and hold single family homes.
And I think the other thing, Ryan, is before we jump off of this, there's an illusion of control when you're an employee, right? And that a lot of people, they believe that they're in control. And in other words, because of that paycheck, you know, and we all have that beat into our head, you know, work hard, work hard, get a paycheck, you know, and buy stuff essentially. But at the end of the day, what you did was you jumped out of the illusion of control and you actually took control of your money. Because the one thing we all know is no matter who you're working for, no matter how good you are, obviously, if you're good, you're probably going to stay there. But if the employer has a hiccup, you could be in trouble.
Totally.
And so the control is, in my opinion, an illusion. Because when you jump out and you start getting in, you know, I always call it, you go from the bay into the ocean, right? You know, when you have a job, you're in the bay. When you go outside of that into, you know, what Kiyosaki would call the fast track, let's say, then you're now actually taking control, and you actually, in my opinion, have the most control. Because right now, like you, Danille, me, you know, we're doing this to help educate, and we're having fun. We're, you know, obviously we're entrepreneurial. We're buying more stuff. We're writing books. We're just having a blast. But Danille has no real financial stress because it's covered with her passive income.
Totally.
Right? Like just like you, like just like me, right? You know, so there's something that's magical when you have a lot of passive income coming in to cover all of your bills for your entire family. It just goes away.
I do.
Sorry,
I do have a question. You know, I know people were listening and, you know, you had said buying 2 homes a year and you bought 17 homes. I know the pushback is going to be you bought those very inexpensively and things are very different now with the prices of homes being so high. So how would you push back on that?
Yeah, it's a great question. Here's what I'll tell you. I had no money. I mean, that's the best part of leverage within real estate is there's all kinds of ways to do real estate. So 2 ways, here's how I did it. All my money was trapped still in my 401k. Like I couldn't take that money out. Now, I did take money out of my brokerage account. I stopped contributing to that, and that allowed me to buy a couple of homes. but I wasn't making big bucks. I was only a couple years out of college, right? And so the way I got going really are two ways. Number one, I wanted financial freedom. I had a desire that, and I think Kiyosaki talks about this, but any entrepreneur has to solve this problem. It's not how, like it's if you can't do it, it's how can I actually do it? It's not, I don't have enough money, so therefore I have to wait. It's getting more creative, getting more resourceful. And so for me, two things happened. Number one, I went into partnership, right? I studied voraciously. I found out all of the ways I could gain access to deals. And I went into a partnership with my brother. He had money, I had hustle. And so we bought all of the properties that we bought in Arizona. I bought using his money, my credit, my hustle. The second thing that I started doing is, again, a form of leverage. And I did this in two different ways. I got into real estate actively. I flipped 3 properties. And I'll be honest with you, the first property I flipped, I'll just give it straight up. It was dumb luck. I mean, I made some money and I walked around with my chest all puffed out. I'm a real estate investor, right? The second house, I broke even. On the third house, I lost money. And so I realized, man, I don't really want to wake up and flip houses. I'm not really that good. I can't tell, the difference between a white wall and a blue wall. I mean, for me, that's like, it just makes no difference to me. And so I stopped flipping houses after that. But the second thing I did is I actually started a side hustle. Once I knew how to make money, and my whole goal today and then, even though I didn't have words to define it, I wanted to convert my fake dollars that I didn't really have control over. Just like you said, Ken, they were laying people off left and right after 2008. Companies were tightening their belts, and I'm looking around me, and now all my coworkers are losing their job, and I'm picking up their responsibility. So I wanted to convert those dollars I didn't have control over into assets that I did. And so I started a couple side hustles, and I found ways to make more money, kind of like you, Danille. I was willing to sacrifice. I was willing to grind. I was willing to work a couple jobs. I just wanted to turn dollars into assets. And the cool part about it is once I started seeing that cash flow stacking up, it started to make sense to me. Like if one house can pay a car payment, then 5 more houses can pay a mortgage. And if 5 more houses pay a mortgage, then I need 3 more on top of that to cover my food. And I just started measuring every decision I was making with how do I buy assets that generate cash flow to cover the expenses that right now are being covered by my active employment. That was how I started playing the game. And, I'll never forget when I actually quit my job. I didn't actually intend to quit. I'd been buying houses for 4 years, had 17 properties, and now I'm living in a different state. My corporate job kept me moving all over the place. And my boss, Rob, showed up. Now, I knew there was a problem because Rob only showed up when one or two things were going on. Like I was in trouble or he was going to have me take on more responsibility. And so I'll never forget that day. I walk out of my office, there was Rob. Rob walks me back into my own office and he sits in my chair at my desk, and I'm sitting across from my desk as Rob's telling me about this quasi promotion that he's going to give me. But they just closed 2 more territories, or they just fired 2 managers, and I'm going to take over 2 more territories. I own Denver. That's where I'm living now. Now I have to travel to Wyoming, have to travel to South Dakota. And without going into some backstory, I had made a commitment to my family a couple years back. I'm done traveling. I had some family issues that, put me in a precarious spot. And so here Rob is telling me in order to keep my job, I got to go back out on the road. And I'll never forget that moment because it did feel like kind of that Charlie Brown moment. He was talking, but it sounded like wah, wah, wah in the background. And I was just adding up my cash flow over and over and over again. I'd never actually stopped to do it at that point. And without meaning to, without intending to, I told Rob I quit. Right. And I'll never forget when those words came out of my mouth. I wanted to pull them out of the air and pop them back in my mouth. I didn't mean to quit that day. But as soon as I did it, as soon as I got over the shock that I just told Rob I quit, a weight fell off my shoulders. Now, when I quit, I couldn't replace my lifestyle. I couldn't travel around the world, but I had enough cash flow coming in that I knew I could keep the lights on. I knew I could keep food on the table, and it opened up a doorway of possibility for me that it was probably always there. I just couldn't see it. But with enough cash flow coming in to cover my basic needs, like I quit that job and it started everything for me. And that really solidified the point of when I own assets that generate monthly income, I have more options in life. And I really believe that's the greatest intrinsic value that money can provide is just more control over your time and more options with what you do with that time.
What was Rob's next move?
It was so funny. He was taken so off guard. He tried to offer me more money, but I should tell you whose real next move was super funny. He tried to offer me more money, but as soon as I said I quit, man, it felt like I was free. I'd never felt that. Not since before college. I'd never felt as free as I did in that moment, but I still had one important thing I had to do. I went into the office that day with the intention of going to work and earning my paycheck, and here I am now, unemployed. I had to go out in the parking lot and call my wife, right? And I call up my wife, and this is how you know you're married to someone amazing. I called her up and I said, hey Beth, I just quit. There was a little bit of silence on the other end of the phone, and then she responded back with the best line ever. Oh man, I laugh every time I say it. She said, "Ryan, it's about damn time."
Yeah.
And that started our entire adventure of what we're doing today. But that opened up a really massive possibility for me.
I'm glad you told that story because I think a lot of people are in various stages of what we just explained, right? And it appears risky, right? But to your point, when you followed a system and then you got to that 17 houses, you actually had the leverage, right? So it's almost like getting out of a relationship that you're trapped in, right?
Yeah.
And you were able to do that. And congratulations, that's a great story.
Back to the sweat equity piece, because I think, even myself, it took me a long time to wrap my head around this, because Ken always says, you don't need any money to buy real estate. And I remember for a long time hearing that and not fully believing it, but it is true, because there's people that have a lot of money and they don't have time, or they don't want to invest their time into, real estate. And then there's people that will dive into real estate and have all the time in the world, but they don't have any money. And when the two of those people meet, that can be amazing. And you had your brother to help do it, and it was a win-win situation. So I always like to harp on that, because I know a lot of people don't believe that.
Yeah, I really think there's 4 keys to a deal, right? And I talk about this all the time. In order for a transaction to happen, you need the actual transaction. Somebody's got to go find the deal, right? And you don't find those on the MLS, right? You have to kind of have a little bit of financial IQ, some connections that you developed over time to gain access to these deals. Then there's the expertise to make the deal jump off the spreadsheet and actually work in reality. So there's the deal and the expertise. Then there's the capital and the credits. And if I try to do real estate by myself, at some point I'm going to run out of one of or all 4 of those things. And this is why real estate's such a great leverage. Ken, I told you this when we did our last video for my summit a couple weeks ago. You've been paying me for years. You've been paying me for years because I invested in one of your syndications, Tucson 8, and you had the deal. You had the expertise. I had the capital at that time, and I didn't have the deals or the expertise, and I gave you the money and you paid me. We both won in that equation. And so I think if you can really get your head around this, and this is what I think, Ken, you talked about risk. I think the biggest risk is not using your time, using your intention today to buy back your time. Ken, you probably talk to just as many people as I do that have followed the path, right, for 20, 30, 40 years in some cases. They didn't get what they thought they were going to get. They've already traded 40 years of their life, and they're wondering, how am I going to do the future, right? They're settling. They're readjusting what they thought retirement was. They're becoming dependent. And so I think the biggest risk is assuming things that you have no control over are actually going to give you an outcome that you want without you taking ownership over that outcome. And when you get clear on what you want and why you want it, the only thing that's standing in your way is you have to raise your financial IQ. Today, like retirement used to be easy. Remember back in the pension days? I mean, it used to be easy. You didn't need financial education. But today, I would say it's almost, if not completely impossible to retire ever with confidence unless you've risen your financial education to understand what you're in, how it works, and that you control to some degree the streams of income and the taxation of that income.
It's interesting. It took me a long time to recognize let's call it Wall Street, right? The financial services sector. But that really, even when I was 40, 50 years old, I'm turning my money over to college graduates that just got out that are really just salespeople for products.
Yep.
That just got out of school, a few years ago, right? And I'm not saying that there's not some incredible wealth managers and financial planners out there, because I believe that there are. I know several of them, but really the whole system is set up. It's a sales funnel. That's all it is. And once you kind of realize that, well, and they don't often even know what products they're putting you in, because they're actually directing you to the ones that give them the best commissions.
Totally.
So the whole system is a bit of a mess. And I don't want to generalize and say the whole industry is that way, but it is that way. and so, so in order to take back control of your own money, by the way, Danille knows this. Like my brother and I are super close. He's older than I am. He went straight into the corporate world. He was the A student in our house. And I was not. Let's just put it that way. But he retired recently. And I'm like, hey man, congratulations. I flew up there. I'm from Seattle. And we hung out and I'm like, well, what are you invested in? Because I have never really had that conversation with him before. And he's like, I have no idea. Like, I talked to our guy and he says we're good. And, and by the way, I don't want to minimize it. They did go down the rabbit hole and they started to take a look at everything. But I'm like, oh my gosh, like I would never have wanted to be in a position where I really don't know how my money is actually making money. Yeah. And that's really what he said. He doesn't know. He knows whether it goes up or down, right? And knows how much they've got. But I'm like, man, to me, those are some handcuffs, not knowing. Right.
Totally. I think this brings me back to Danille's question that she asked to start this presentation off. I mean, if you don't know what you're invested in and you don't know how it works, then you're constantly aware of and nervous of who's in the Oval Office. What decisions are they making? Like, how's it going to work? Because all of that has a direct impact on you, but you don't really know how to connect the dots. You don't know how to correlate. Trump is raising tariffs. How's that going to affect my retirement plan? But if you do raise your financial education and you understand, I really believe there's two parallel economies going on simultaneously in our world. There's the dependency economy. And in the dependency economy, like I said, it's full of really good people with good intentions. They're probably doing the same thing they're recommending you, but they're dependent on a system that they have no control over. When I turn my money over to a financial advisor who's selling me a set of mutual funds, it's not like that person can predict the market any better than I can. That person doesn't have any insider knowledge on NVIDIA or, Tesla or whatever, right? They're just kind of picking and choosing and hoping it works. But they make money whether I win or lose, right? And that's frustrating. That's frustrating to me. But on the other side of the dependency economy, there's the ownership economy. And this isn't for everyone because owning assets and achieving financial freedom, it requires us to pick up both sides of the ownership stick, right? I have to pick up the fact that, look, if I want a result, I have to do the work, I have to raise my financial education. And when I don't get a result that I thought I wanted, the risk that I was taking was a lack of my financial education. I've lost a lot of money. I'm sure, you guys as you have as well. But every time I've lost money in real estate, and I took ownership over why I had the loss, it makes me a better investor next time I do it, right? I've refined my decision-making process. I've refined my expectations of what's reasonable and possible with real estate, and it gets easier to make more money the next time and the next time and the next time. And so the ownership of the economy and the dependency economy, they exist in parallel. If I'm in the dependency economy, my fingers crossed, I got to wait till I'm 65 and I just hope it works out. If I'm in the ownership economy, it's exactly as, Bob Allen said in his book, you can retire in 10 years or less. I mean, you can use real estate and all of its many profit centers and other tax strategies to generate 6 figures or more of tax-free income. And you can do it in a constrained timeline with the right understanding of how money works.
Yeah.
So go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, I love that. I love how you break that out. I often say something similar where I call it you're either on the consumer side or you're on the producer side. And so, and the interesting thing is, just to take one more step, is the government actually rewards the ownership and the producer side. So that's why they give you tax breaks to provide housing or whatever it is, you provide jobs. And, there are things that there's incentives to do that side of it. When you're on the, I call it the consumer side, you're at a massive disadvantage. You don't really have the tax breaks and some of the things. So I call it just low hanging fruit. I tell everybody, just go form yourself an LLC and go do something, because like you're going to have tax benefits because you're now in the game. You're not, yes, you're at the starting line still, but you've now just created a way to offset some of your ordinary income legally. by, using the tools that the government gives you. And that was the real epiphany. I know what we talk about real estate a lot here, and, going out and buying it and passive income, but isn't like one of the most significant benefits of being able to offset that income legally?
It is fascinating. I mean, Ken, the more I've learned about money and how money works, I mean, this is an oversimplification of it, but basically the tax code is about 3,000 pages long and then several thousand pages beyond that with addendums and additional, information in there. But basically the very first sentence, the first line, the first section of the tax code says everything you make is taxable. Right. And
Right.
if that's in there, then why do we need the other 3,000 pages? Right. And after that statement, that's what the other 3,000 pages are for. And I don't know, like, I've never actually read all 3,000 pages front to back, but according to GTP, it said that 38% of that tax code is applicable to one form or another, people who are putting their money in real estate. So the majority of the tax incentives, the IRS is using real estate because they need to drive economic behavior. They need to drive economic outcomes, and real estate's a major GDP driver. So they give people like you, like me, who raise our financial IQ incentives to say, hey, go do more of that, provide housing, provide resources, provide a great service to the economy, both local and federal, and you get to keep more of your money. And that right there, it made it so much easier for me, right? When I quit my job, I had cash flow coming in independent of taxes. I was making $150,000 a year, but that's not what I was keeping. After you take out taxes and money going to savings, I only needed about $6,700 of monthly tax-free income to replace my bare bones basic living expenses. So if I can understand the tax game, it becomes so much easier to create financial freedom in a very short period of time.
Yeah. And I think it's funny. You start off just like you said, trying to create that financial freedom. But then the icing on the cake are the tax. Cause that's the piece that I didn't even understand until I started getting in the game. And actually in the early days, I had bookkeeper CPAs that didn't either. I was doing my books and records. And then I fired one of them and I moved to somebody else, and they said, well, you haven't been taking depreciation and all these other things that you can do. I go, what are you talking about? And then all of a sudden that just like opened that new chapter. That was a long time ago. But from there now, I'm in the position now where we have so many investors. We've had investors over 20 plus years now. That's all they care about is, they how do I offset this, my tax? And so I mean, I got calls all last week, like I'm pulling this cash out, how do you have anything that will defer my taxes? Because we're now in a year-end situation.
Yeah.
And so I'm getting that question a lot. People are emailing me, texting me, is there anything you have that I can write off my income? And so that's another piece that a lot of people don't get. Now, it takes, obviously you have to have money. You have to be around people with money to actually understand that. But there does become a piece where once you pass that financial freedom and you move into the, call it preserving wealth, where that becomes almost as important as the passive income piece.
Totally does. I mean, taxes in one way or the other, they're the greatest destroyer of wealth. I mean, because if we really think about it, every dollar that we have, it's taxed multiple times, directly and indirectly, from things that, actual taxes, payroll taxes, employment taxes, sales tax, but also the kind of the hidden tax of inflation. And this is why I think today, Danille, I know off air we were talking a little bit about how do people win today, right? With inflation, what it is, here's the way I think about it. Taxes, inflation, interest rates, opportunity cost, those are four economic forces. We can all say, hey, they all exist for every single person, for Ken, for me, for anyone watching this video or listening to this podcast. Those four economic forces, they exist. But the question you have to ask yourself is, are those economic forces, are they working for you or are they working against you? right? If we go back to the beginning, if I just put my money in a 401k, taxes are working against me. Inflation is massively working against me. Opportunity cost, because now I've locked up my money, is working against me. And then for most people, I mean, consumer debt has skyrocketed because my money's locked up. I go take credit card interest rate, with high interest rates, and interest rates are working against me. So for every step forward of me working hard, saving, all of these economic forces are working against me, making it harder, if not impossible, to ever achieve financial freedom. But if I just flip where my money's at, right, and we'll use real estate because that's really the focus of this conversation today, I can put my money in an asset where inflation makes me wealthy. I can put my money in an asset where taxes make me wealthy, where interest rates make me wealthy. I can borrow money at a fixed interest rate from a bank and triple that interest rate in an actual piece of real estate with leverage. Opportunity cost is working for me rather than against me. All of those economic forces, the biggest question that someone has to ask and answer for themselves is, am I putting my money in a position where those economic forces are making it easier or harder for me to achieve an outcome? And if you can just get clear on that, the game of money becomes so much easier.
Yep. Yeah.
So do you think that these Main Street investments are going to do better than the Wall Street investments in the next, let's call it 10 years?
Oh, I love that question. And who knows what we're going to predict down the road. But here's the one thing I'll say. Danille, what do you think? Like, what is, like, if someone were to say, hey, the average return I'm going to get in the stock market is whatever, what do you think that number is?
Oh, I don't know anything about the stock
I
market.
think they'd be happy with 5 to 7%.
Yeah, 5, 7, 8%. Here's the crazy part. And I'm just going to use single family homes because that's what I specialize in. The compound annual growth rate of a boring 3-bedroom, 2-bath home, middle America that everyone wants, everyone needs to live in, most over demand, undersupplied. The compound annual growth rate is 5%. So if we just stop on the surface and the stock market makes 7, 8% and the compound annual growth rate of appreciation is 5%, you would look at that on the surface and say, market's better than the real estate. But here's the crazy part. If we go back to those economic forces, I can put a 20% down payment. I can go borrow 80% of the purchase price from the bank to then buy that asset, and I control and own the asset. And if all I had to do was put a 20% down payment and I'm still getting a 5% annualized compound annual growth rate, my actual rate of return on my 20% down payment is 25%. It's because of leverage, right? So leverage is the multiplier. That's really what it is. And leverage will cut both ways. That's why you have to raise your financial IQ. But if I can just buy a boring asset and let time, inflation, taxes, all of those things make me wealthy, then 100% I believe that anything on Main Street will outperform Wall Street. And just look at Warren Buffett. Warren Buffett is sitting on massive amounts of cash because he knows the market is overhyped and overvalued. But if we just look at it on its core, the market only makes money in one way. It appreciates. I don't control appreciation, right? That's public opinion. So I don't control it in real estate, but I don't control it in the market either. But if I can buy real estate, I get appreciation, I get amortization, I get tax advantages, and I get leverage. I get multiple profit centers working for me to where it increases my return, decreases my risk, and it makes it easier to achieve financial freedom.
Yeah, I think that's really well said. The other piece that you get is you get the tax write-off piece, but you also get the tenant pays it off for you. Like, that's the piece that a lot of people forget. Like, you're buying assets that somebody else is paying off, and in its simplest form. If you invest, shouldn't you buy things that somebody else pays off? Totally. Like just that simple, right? Like, that's what I want. I want to buy stuff that other people want, and they pay off for me.
So by default, then, real estate has a guaranteed return then built in. Although someone else is going to give me a guaranteed return by making the payments for me.
Yeah. So that's how I see it, is in its simplest form. And so why wouldn't I buy something that somebody else is going to pay off? And then, great. If the market runs, great. If the rents go up, great. But even if they don't, if it cash flows on day one, I'm good. Because somebody's paying me. And that's the passive income, I think, in its simplest form. But then beyond that, you get all those other things as well.
Totally. I couldn't agree with you more, Ken. And that's really, for me, I'm really grateful for the path that real estate opened up for me. What I learned early on, and Danille, I think you and I kind of learned some of the same lessons. I didn't want to actually do real estate. I mean, when I had my first properties and I was managing tenants and I was trying to flip real estate, I'm like, oh my gosh, this isn't what I want. Right. And so what I've built with my real estate portfolio over the years is a passive system, right? I want to do real estate in a way where I can own the assets and have most of the work of that asset outsourced to property managers, to really good, portfolio managers, to people who will flip my properties on my behalf. And I want them to make a lot of money. I want them to make really good money, but I want to own the assets. And if I can own the assets and I can understand, what a good asset is in a good neighborhood and just let time make me wealthy, then I really believe that the key for financial freedom that I missed in the beginning, I'm so grateful for Kiyosaki because he's like, hey, real estate, right? And I got into it, but I realized if I'm not careful, that's just a second job, right? It's another job. And so I had to build a system where I own the asset and I measure my financial success with cash flow greater than expenses. But the way I experience financial freedom is with time, right? And so the key to everything I think I've built over the years is showing people how to build what I call a passive income machine that will allow you to convert dollars from your active income into real assets that make you wealthy, take the profits of those assets and roll them right back into the system to compound and accelerate your wealth, and achieve financial freedom in 10 years or less by using the economy, using the system that's already set up to your advantage, rather than parking your money in a place like a 401k where you're just kind of sitting back like your brother with his fingers crossed. And I'm sure he worked really hard. I'm sure he followed the game. I'm sure he played the system. But no doubt he had to trade 40 years, right? He had to trade 40 years for it to work out. And I don't think most people have 40 years. Most people are struggling to get by today. And even if you have 40 years, why trade it? I mean, we get one shot at this thing called life. Why trade it? Why not take ownership of your money, then take ownership of your decisions, then take ownership of your results and build a system that rewards you rather than kind of crossing your fingers and hoping it works out.
So if our listeners were going to make one change today, because I'm sure they're feeling just a little overwhelmed, especially if this is the first time they've heard about this, what would you recommend they do?
Well, if I could say anything, I would say we live in a world where you're inundated with information, right? I mean, I'm sure your listeners, I'm a listener. I got your podcast on auto. Every time you get a new episode, I'm listening to your episodes every week. But what converts the knowledge in our head or in on a podcast into wisdom is by doing something, by taking action, right? And I think too many people confuse listening to taking action. They confuse that. And so I did not actually really start learning financial lessons until I put down the book, Rich Dad Poor Dad, and I went and bought my first property. And I was naive, right? I was naive. I didn't know what the outcome was. And I thought I was really successful until I had my first make ready, until I had to deal with my first tenant. And all of those things, they taught me lessons. So if I were to say anything, I would say, number one, do something with the knowledge. Number two, what accelerated my learning more than anything, I kind of grew up in a world where, if something's broke, you fix it, right? If you just work harder and things will work out. And I had to learn a different form of leverage. I had to learn, again, a Robert Kiyosaki lesson that, the rich, they have to get themselves around people who've done what they want to do and then ask questions, learn from them. As soon as I started putting myself in the rooms where people were buying real estate, I started to take what I thought was overwhelming and it started to become really simple. Ken, you and I know Scott Saunders really well. If I get in a room with Scott, that dude looks like just an average, normal, everyday person. But then you start talking to him and he's bought hundreds of single family homes. And if I can ask, Scott how he did it, then I can realize a normal guy like Scott did it. If he can do it, maybe I can too. Right. And so those two things, that's number one. Do something, take action, meaningful action in the real world, and get yourself around people who've already achieved what you're trying to achieve. It just accelerates your path forward so much faster.
And it really is true that you are who you hang out with. You've heard that since you were a kid, but it really reflects on if you want to be successful, you need to be hanging around successful people.
Yeah, I like to say environment is stronger than will. Because it is true. You don't have to abort, your family and friends that, because as you start to, I'll call it ascend, and learn more and do different things, you are going to get pulled for people that say that's risky. You shouldn't be doing that. That's part of the process. You just need to understand that there's forces working against you too. But when you get into that circle, that you change your environment, then you actually you can accelerate it forward as well.
Totally.
But that first step of breaking out of, it really is true. Jim Rohn's, quote, right? You are the 5 people you hang out with. It is true. I know before we wrap up here, Ryan, thank you. This has been fascinating. I know we should talk about your book. Also, you have a little bit of an offer here, so maybe you can discuss that.
Well, Ken, I want you to know how much you've inspired me over the years. I just see you and Danille constantly giving back, constantly giving back. And, I've been now in this industry helping people in their personal financial plans for the better part of 13 years now. And it's been such a rewarding 13 years because the mission of our book is to help people achieve financial freedom in 10 years or less. And in the beginning, I didn't know what I knew, right? I didn't know what I didn't know, I guess is a better way to say it, right? It wasn't until I did it myself and helped several people do it over a 10-year time span that I've seen so many different angles. I've seen, someone who's in their 50s. I've seen someone who's in their 20s. I've seen people in the middle. I've seen people starting in debt, people starting with assets. And so really what we did for your audience, Ken, the book that we wrote, it's Retire in 10 Years or Less, Unlock Your Passive Income Machine and Secure Tax-Free Income for Life. And that's really the title and subtitle say what it is. But for your audience, I wanted to make it as easy as possible. If you go to retireintenyears.com/Ken, I'll give them a free copy of the book, free, the PDF. Now they can buy it on Amazon if they want. It's, not too much on Amazon, but I'll give them a free copy of the book. And what I wanted to do with this book, I'm a very visual person. I mean, it's one thing to read it. It's another thing to see it. And some of the concepts that I talk about in here, they're abstract enough in the sense that, we've never heard money talked about the way Robert Kiyosaki talks about it, the way you talk about it, really. How do we turn debt into income? And so we included 10 hours of a companion course on there. Has calculators, has video trainings, has PDFs, everything you need to actually see your financial situation inside of this system. You can plug in your numbers and it'll tell you how far away from traditional retirement you are. It'll also tell you how close you could be if you just switch the way you do money. So retireintenyears.com/Ken, free copy of the book, free companion course that comes with it. And I just want to help everyone today. I really believe, like I said earlier, our life is defined by our time. And too many people trade too much of their life for money and they don't ever get the dreams that they want. They have this bucket list that just kind of fades away over time. My objective isn't to retire and stop. It's to really have more options with your life, to live a purpose-driven life, because money is your tool to create, man, if I woke up tomorrow and my time was mine, what would I do to give me fulfillment? And that's the funnest journey of life, is when you can be driven by your intrinsic desires, not by money as the forefront of why you do what you do with your time.
Great. Yeah. Well said. Well said. And appreciate the offer. You guys, free is good. So,
good.
I appreciate it, Ryan. Congrats on your success, and can't wait to have you back on and see, where you've taken all of this, and appreciate it.
Appreciate you, Ken. Appreciate you, Danille. Thank you so much for your time today.
All right. Thanks, Ryan.